There's a lot of things that you can do with power. You can build a cool solar panel array, you can build your own nuclear reactor, and you can praise the orb. All praise the orb. But in all seriousness, power is one of the best, if not the best power generation mod in the entire of Minecraft, especially in Vault Hunters. It's so useful there. And I'm going to show you exactly how it works from the generation to the storage, transport, and usage of power. So starting with the basics, there's two items that are going to be really useful for you. The wrench, which can be used to configure all of the machines, and the power manual. The power manual will allow you to look up different items and just give a very brief description of what they do. Incredibly useful if you do need a prompt or you get lost at any point. Or, you could always just watch the video again. And there's a couple of other basic ingredients that are common amongst all of the things in power that you're going to want to start building up a collection of, because they will be useful all the way to the end game. The first one is dielectric paste, and you can think of this as sort of the basic building blocks of power. You use it for wires, generators, absolutely everything. It is a little bit pricey because of these Vault Nuggets, but in general you can get them just after the early game without too much of a problem. The other item is a capacitor. Now these come in different sizes, but the only one that you can actually craft is the basic capacitor. That requires 4 benniatite and a block of redstone, so it can be a little bit expensive. At the beginning, you're going to need tiny capacitors, and you can turn one normal capacitor into a couple of tiny capacitors, which means that your items will go a lot further in the beginning. But as you start getting into the more advanced stuff, you're going to need to get these large capacitors, and you're going to need 2 basic capacitors for every large one. The final item is the dielectric casing. Now this is something that I always end up running out of, but you're going to need 4 blocks of iron, 4 dielectric rods, and 1 gem to be able to make it. And the dielectric rods are a few paste, a couple of benniatite, and 1 larimar. Now the good news is, if you're not playing Vault Hunters, then these recipes are significantly cheaper, and you can get them very, very easily just using some coal and some lava. Now once you've got all of that sorted, it's time to start generating some power, and the easiest way to do that early game is using a furnator. Now the furnator is pretty simple. You stick in some coal, it generates some power, nice and easy, and this one gives you 15 Fe per tick. There's 2 really important numbers that you need to check anytime that you're making a generator: the generates and the max extract. The generate number is fairly straightforward. It's basically how much energy it generates while it's running. The extract one, however, tells you how much energy you can actually pull out of that block, even if it's got excess power in it. Looking at the starter furnator, if you've got something that requires 15 Fe per tick, then this can generate it and just keep it running constantly. If it's got more than 15 but less than 80, as long as there's already energy stored within the furnator, then you can use that to pull the energy out and then still power it for a short period of time. But if you need something that requires more than 80 Fe per tick, then this isn't going to be able to power it, even if it's got a bunch of energy stored in it. Now, if you don't have a bunch of burnable blocks, but you do have an excess of lava, then you can use the magmator, just sling in some lava, it'll fill up, and slowly use the lava that's in there in order to generate power. Now these tend to have pretty similar outputs, but they're not my favourite to use because they require maintenance, whereas the next 2 require no maintenance at all. The thermogenerator uses a temperature differential to generate power. The first thing that it needs is some water. It also needs something underneath it that generates heat. That can be a magma block. Now, if you do use magma, you're going to lose 20% of the efficiency, so this is only giving out 12 instead of the normal 15. However, you can use lava, which will give you the full 100%. Now, there is one other thing you can do with thermogenerators to make them supercharge and give you a ridiculous amount of energy, and that is to use a block of blazing crystal underneath the thermogenerator. That'll give you 280% of the output and give you 42 energy per tick, even though it only says it generates 15. Now we'll look at blazing crystals a little bit later on when we're upgrading our generators, but for now, just be aware that is a very, very good use for it. Now the other generator that you don't need to monitor are the solar panels, because they will just generate energy for you throughout the day. They don't work at night, and they don't work if there's any items above it, but you can just leave these on top of your roof and they'll generate a bunch of power. Now, there is an item called a Lens of Ender that you can add on to your solar panels, which will mean that they will then work even if they are covered by a particular block. It's basically using the end dimension to generate the energy. Useful if you've got an underground base. Now, the final way to generate energy in Powah is to use a nuclear reactor. In order to make a nuclear reactor, you're going to need some uranite, which you will get from smelting down raw uranite, whether that's dense or poor quality, into these reactor segments. You're going to need 36 of those in order to be able to build your reactor. And when you've got all 36, you can just put them on the ground and it will start to build your nuclear reactor as a multi-block structure. Nuclear reactors are incredibly expensive to make, but they do generate a lot more power than any of the other power generation methods. Now, there's a couple of things that you need to do in order to make the reactor work. The first thing is to fill it with water. It's really important to keep this topped up, otherwise your reactor will overheat and end up shutting off, so I'd recommend having some sort of infinite water source going into it, such as a sink. The next thing to do is to add some uranite, and that will fill up this green bar, and it will also start raising the temperature. And the higher the temperature, the more uranite actually gets used. So there's a few things you can do to make this significantly more efficient. So firstly, you can add a block of redstone. That will fill up this red bar, and it will increase the amount of energy that is being produced. So it just jumped up from 700 to 925 Fe per tick. The downside is, though, it increases the temperature, which also means that your fuel gets consumed more quickly. To counteract this, you can use some solid coolant. Now, there's two ones that I would recommend, either dry ice or blue ice. Dry ice can be found underground, and if you have absolutely tons of it, I'd highly recommend using it because it makes the most efficient coolant for the reactor. However, it is not worth making yourself. Dry ice requires a perfect alexandrite and 3 blue ice for every single dry ice that you use. The benefits are so small, it's just not worth doing it. I would not recommend making this at all. But as I say, you can find this underground, and if you've got a load of it, definitely use it. Now, when we've got the coolant in, it will drop this temperature massively. And I'm talking, it was at 400, it is now dropping all the way down to 24. Now, what you can do is add blocks of coal, which is going to give you carbon, and that is going to increase the efficiency of the generator as a whole. And now we are generating 1.6k Fe per tick. So 1,600 Fe per tick compared to the 15 that you get from the Fernator. They're honestly not even in the same league. Now, if you are finding this guide useful, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We are so close to 3,000 subscribers now, so just take a second and press that subscribe button. Now, what do you need to do if you're not generating enough power? Luckily, there are 7 different levels in Powah, starting with Starter, Basic, Hardened, Blazing, Niotic, Spirited, and Nitro. As you get further on in the game, your power need is going to increase, so you can upgrade your existing generators and your existing infrastructure in order to support the additional power needs. So let's take our starter Fernator. We can use that Fernator and upgrade it using some more materials to a basic Fernator. And that basic Fernator will now generate 70 Fe per tick compared to the 15 that we were getting before. As a general rule of thumb, it is always better to upgrade your existing generator than it is to build a separate one and run 2 generators at once. Now, these first 2 levels are only going to cost you normal materials, so things like iron, dielectric paste, things like that. Once you start getting to Hardened, Blazing, Niotic, you're going to have to start making some custom items for that tier of generator. Hardened requires energized steel, Blazing requires blazing crystals, Niotic requires niotic crystals, Spirited requires spirited crystals, and Nitro requires nitro crystals. Pretty self-explanatory. In order to get these materials, you're going to need to start worshipping the energizing orb. So how you do this is you build the energizing orb itself, which is honestly really cheap, and you only really need 1 of these. And then you need to stick it in front of at least 1 of these energizing rods. Looking at the energized steel, we need to put in iron, gold, and if you're playing Vault Hunters, a perfect alexandrite. Now once you put these items in here, these beams will slowly start to energize the items in there, transforming them into the energized steel or whatever item you're looking to craft. You can end up staring at this for hours at a time, which is why it kind of became a cult on our server. Once this hits 100%, these items get transformed into the energized steel. Now I would strongly recommend upgrading your energizing rods anytime you upgrade your generator. Now this one I've got a sink going into a thermo generator on top of a blazing crystal, and I have 3 energizing rods all hooked up. But even then, it still took several minutes for the energizing steel to actually be produced. If we, however, go over to a nitro setup and then stick in the iron, gold, and perfect alexandrite, it is immediately done. So it is definitely worth upgrading these as soon as you can, and if you want to only use one rod, that's completely fine. If you want to use multiple to speed it up, you can do that as well. It just depends on how much time you want to sink in. Just to give you an idea of how powerful nitro reactors are though, this one's currently generating 81,000 FE per tick, or the equivalent of over 5,000 starter furnators. So now the energy generation is done, let's talk about transporting the energy, starting with these lovely energy cells. Now when we look at the starter energy cell, we can see this has the same 2 statistics as the generator. First one is how much energy it'll hold, and the second one is how much energy it can transfer. As we go up, we can see that it drastically increases both the amount of energy it can store as well as the amount of energy it can transfer, all the way up to nitro, which can hold 140 million energy and push out 400,000 FE per tick, which if you need more than that, you're probably doing something wrong. These work really simply, just pick it up and then move it and place it back down again. So if we start putting a load of energy in there from our reactor, break it, and then bring it over to these machines, we can just put it down and the machines will start to take the power away and use it as normal. This will slowly drain and these will continue to process. As a side note, this is a really easy way to just infinitely generate gunpowder, and then you can turn that into TNT later. But you don't want to be constantly moving your energy cells about all the time, it's an absolute pain. So the solution to that is to use one of these ender cells. Now an ender cell works pretty much the same way as an energy cell does, except you can hook them all up to this energy network. If you look at your ender cell and it says that you have 0 out of 0 FE, that means that it cannot hold any energy and you need to increase it by using a battery on it. It can be an empty battery or a full battery, doesn't make a difference. So you just go into it, shift right click on the battery, and that will increase the capacity to 140 million in this case. Now, there are 12 different channels that you can use at nitro level, whereas something like a basic ender cell only has 2 channels. But this allows us an insane amount of flexibility. We can set the gunpowder farm to channel 1, set our energy hopper setup to channel 2, and our transmitter to channel 3. What we can then do is take this item called an ender gate, stick that on our reactor, and then fully charge channel 1, start charging up channel 2, and start charging up channel 3. And that means that our gunpowder farm, our energy hopper, and our transmitter are all working completely on wireless power. Now we can take this one further by using batteries. And as you can see here, the energy from the ender cell has been going into an energy hopper, which will then charge any batteries that are in the chest next to it. So these are fully charged batteries, and you can then replace them with empty batteries, and it will start to increase. Just be aware, batteries can be quite expensive, so make sure you're using them wisely. Now batteries are great because if you have an item that needs power, you can just shift right click it, and then it will power and charge up any items in your inventory that require power. You can also put the battery in pretty much any charm slot or accessory slot that you want, just to save you some inventory space if you've not completely maxed out your charms yet. This is incredibly useful for something like an atomic disassembler, where you can shift right click and the atomic disassembler will just start charging pretty rapidly from your inventory. Now, if your battery runs out of power, there's a few different ways that you can go about charging it. Firstly, you can use the energy hopper setup, stick it in a chest and it will slowly start charging as long as there's adequate power going into it. You can go directly to a generator and then stick it in the power slot, or you can use the player transmitter. Now the player transmitter is just fantastic, especially in Vault Hunters. To craft it, it's pretty much the same structure as all of the other items that we've been crafting so far: crystals, dielectric paste, capacitors. But you are also going to need a binding card. Now there's two types of binding card: the normal binding card, which is extremely cheap to make, or a dimensional binding card, which is a little bit insane. When you've got your binding card, simply right click it while it's in your inventory and then put it inside the player transmitter. And what that's then going to do is it's going to start charging up any rechargeable items that you've got in your inventory. Batteries, atomic disassemblers, doesn't matter, it will charge the lot as long as you are in the same dimension as it. And that is the big one, because a normal binding card will not work in the vault. However, if you want to use an Omega Pog and make a dimensional binding card, hop into a vault and then grab a battery. You can see the battery is starting to fill up. It can be a little bit weird and sometimes it glitches, but it should fill up while you're in the vault or in any other dimension, including the end or nether. Realistically, you're probably not going to need this. You could just carry a full battery around with you and just have it recharge when you get back to your base, but I guess there might be some sort of niche reasons that you'd want it. Who knows? Now the final item in Powah is the energy discharger. It pretty much does what you'd expect it to. It just reduces the amount of charge that's in batteries when you put it inside. It can charge energy cells that are attached to it, so it's basically turning battery power into cell power, whereas the energy hopper is doing cell power into battery power. They're pretty much opposites of each other. This is quite useful if you're upgrading your battery, because in order to get the next level of battery, same as all of the other things, you need the previous level in order to upgrade. And I absolutely love the modular way that this works, because it means that you're not having to throw out your spirited battery, you can just upgrade it to a nitro. But that's it. You know everything there is to know about the Powah mod now, other than wires, but I'm pretty sure you can figure out how a wire works. If you did find the video useful, make sure to give it a like, subscribe if you're not subscribed already. Again, we are so close to that 3,000 mark. Thanks for watching everyone, I've been Hellfire Mage, and I will see you next time.